Hello everyone. Nice. A warm good afternoon for all the participants. We will briefly start. We'll start our session briefly as we are waiting for more participants to join. So, welcome all to this webinar on the thesis writing. I hope all of you are fine and healthy and safe. Now, please ensure that you take care of yourself during this pandemic time and such that you can focus upon your work and you can also focus upon your research properly. Now, most of the times now, I think it is going on online only because research cannot be conducted right now as many of the institutes are closed for, wet lab work. So hopefully all the participants who are here right now and who have joined this are able to work properly and, you guys are able to collect the necessary information for, pursuing your thesis further and working out appropriately. Uh, a nice good afternoon to all of you. Sit down, relax, and enjoy this webinar on thesis writing. I hope that I can make it I make it interesting for you and give you appropriate tips on thesis writing such that it will be helpful for all of you guys in writing a good thesis and you can get out with good grades for the thesis, and also that it would be quite informative and helpful for all of you. So, essentially speaking, thesis writing, as such, you say, is very critical aspect. So, we will focus on this in detail in today's webinar, and I will be speaking elaborately on as how to do thesis writing and how we go about with it. So, please pay attention to all the points which I mentioned and all the points which I would be elaborating on. Once the seminar ends, we have a live question and answer session for around 20 minutes. You can ask all of your questions at that relevant time. So please focus on the presentation and on the slides for the time being. And once that is done, when I come to the live question answer session, I'll answer all your questions. So you can address me the various questions at that time and I will respond back to you appropriately. So you don't have to worry about your questions in that way. You don't have to, worry about the questions. You don't have to worry about the questions in that way. So they will be answered appropriately and then everything would be covered out. So you focus on the slides and you try to understand what I'm trying to explain out. And so once that gets done with, you can tell me the questions. So we will be starting the seminar shortly, and then you just sit down, relax, and try to enjoy this. So with this thesis writing part, I understand that most of them have issues in writing the thesis because it is new for any and every person as how to write the thesis and how to go ahead with the thesis. So we are here to explain you. Later on, we are here to guide you as how to do it out and how to work out with the thesis part. So hopefully that you will get a lot of insights from this and it could be helpful for you in order to write. So when I explain you the thesis writing part today, it will be more or less generalized. I'm not going to talk about any of the specific streams in which thesis is written. A thesis which is written in any stream essentially is pretty much the same. You have the same set of instructions, you have the same set of rules that you follow. So this presentation and webinar should be catering to any of the streams in which thesis per se is generally written. So You do not have to worry that the focus here is on a specific field. The way the presentation has been made is that it is for all of them and not addressing a specific area or stream of science. So essentially, I think in that way, it will be helpful for any of you people, whoever are going to write the thesis, and it will be helping out to all of them. So keeping that in mind itself, this webinar and the presentation has been made for the webinar so that all of you can understand and evaluate and work out for the thesis. So thesis writing, essentially, when you start with and when you work out with, you have to have a couple of points which are understood very clearly and which are evaluated. So in our today's presentation, we are going to focus on the various of the tips and the tricks which are going to be used and which we are going to work out in order to see that it is done. So we will focus on all these things and we will work out on all these things. And then we will have the live question answer session, which will be helpful for us in a way as such that you can, address various of your queries that you have and various of them which you can work out with. So, so please sit back, enjoy and relax this webinar, understand and take away the various points which are mentioned here, and then you can successfully ensure that based on whatever tips and tricks we are trying to mention out, you can effectively work it out and you can proceed ahead in writing a successful thesis. Now, having said that, I will now start with the what do you call the webinar on for the tips and tricks for writing a thesis. This the various contents which are here in the today's discussion are what are presented here. First, I will be talking about what exactly is thesis, why we have to write. So it's a brief introduction to thesis will be presented here today. So once we have the brief introduction to thesis, then we will have the various instructions that have to be followed for writing the thesis. Now, these 2 points, though look are not that important, but they play a very important role when you have the final outcomes for your thesis. So we will have these done with first, then the thesis directly doesn't start with its content in terms of its chapters, but it starts with writing preliminary pages. When I say preliminary pages, these pages include a large number of them, like cover page, approval sheet, abstract, acknowledgement, and others. So we will be discussing each of this in detail, and we will be covering each of this in detail, saying that how you present these out first, and following this, how we go about in working out the rest of the things. Then you will have the then we will be discussing the thesis content. What are the various chapters that you write in the thesis, which include introduction, review of literature, then methodology, results, discussion, and summary, conclusion, and recommendation. So each of this will be discussed in detail, and then we will be saying how you have to do it out and how we have to see. Now, then post that, we will be looking at one of the important aspects which is associated with it, that is editing of the thesis. We will talk about how to edit the thesis because this is one of the significant parts which is there. Then how to write the bibliography, and once you submit the thesis, what are the reviewer expectations and how you meet with the reviewer expectations appropriately. All of these contents will be covered very clearly. You do not have to worry about it, that we will do each of them in detail. And there is a live question and answer session for around 20 minutes. So I will be answering all your questions. So you mainly focus on the presentation. And once you have the presentation, then we will work out based on what are the various questions and the answers which you will arise. I will answer them out properly. Now, first coming to what is thesis. Now, as highlighted here, a thesis essentially is written in a particular subject, and that thesis, whatever we write in a particular subject, it is submitted usually for the doctoral degree, or it is submitted for dissertation for masters. Now it is applicable for both masters as well as for PhD students. So it is a thesis, whenever is written, is an argument which is presented in a highly scientific manner, and this argument is presented in front of a committee for approval. Now we are trying to raise a question in thesis, and this question, whatever we raise in thesis, is the one which we are trying to answer. So whether can we answer this question clearly or we cannot answer this question is the main issue associated with thesis. So we collect evidence and we reason it, and based on the evidence we try to convince the committee members that this research work, whatever has been done, is highly validated. So we have, based on this, based on the validation, we present our argument, and we try to go ahead with presenting and defending the thesis. So thus thesis is essentially it's a piece of writing which is highly methodological, highly organized, and is very effective in convincing people that this work has a lot of significance. Now, as has been said here, the thesis is like a storytelling. You are trying to convey your entire research in the form of a nice story, wherein which you raise questions and you answer the questions precisely and clearly. Now, when you are writing the thesis, there are specific number of points which are addressed very clearly. Now, the points which have to be addressed are clearly mentioned here, which include the question raised that needs to be addressed. So what is the question that we are raising, how we are going to address it out? Then we talk about the necessity to work on hypothesis. So we raise a hypothesis. When we raise a particular hypothesis, we go about with that hypothesis and we try to find if that hypothesis is correct or not. So how does the hypothesis fit into the existing literature? Does it mean that are we collecting the hypothesis from literature, or are we collecting it from elsewhere? Then what are the various methods that we follow for working? All have to be elaborated in detail. Then what are the various results and discussions we obtain? And the most critical part is how we defend the hypothesis based on the results. So, and if we find that our hypothesis is matching with the results we have obtained, then our thesis is very successful. That doesn't mean that if it doesn't match, it is not, but we have to treat it in a different manner. Then once we have that the hypothesis is matching with the results or not, then we have to explain what is the scope of work. So we have done this work, does it have any future scope? Can it be further worked out? And what are the things that we have to do if we have to work it out further? So these are the various aspects which have to be clearly covered in the thesis and which have to be worked out. Now, that brings us to a very important question as why we have to write a thesis. Now, let me explain it to you clearly. You have to write the thesis because you have done research, but there should be a method of explaining the research. The method of explaining the research is only by one way, that is by writing thesis. So it is your entire hard work of a researcher, as it has been highlighted here, ends in thesis. So you have done a lot of hard work and you want to show that your work has got a specific, it has got a specific recognition, so which is presented in the form of thesis. The thesis is nothing but you're showcasing your work in a highly scientific and a logical manner so that people understand it, they appreciate it, and then they try to have takeaway points from the thesis based on which we go ahead. Now, it summarizes the patterns, trends, and structure in the experiments performed by the researcher. The thesis is the very soul of research work. You have to write it in a proper way, and you have to address everything properly so that people understand and appreciate as how it is done. Then thesis is nothing but scientific writing. There are two aspects to the scientific writing. One is you have to have the structure, which has to be obtained properly. Then you have to organize the entire thesis in defined formats. Once you have the structure of the thesis obtained, then you go with the organization of the thesis. And once you organize the thesis, then you will know immediately that everything falls into place, and then you can have a thesis which can be well defended appropriately. So we will proceed ahead systematically with these things. Now, before writing the thesis, an important question which many of the people ask is, what are the prerequisites for writing thesis? Yes, they are prerequisites for thesis writing. You just don't work for some time and then say, okay, I'm done with it, now I'll start writing thesis. Writing thesis is not decided just by the researcher. Writing thesis is decided by the supervisor, because he is the one who is helping you out. So you collect all the necessary material first. Once you collect it, you discuss with supervisor, you present entire thing to him, and once you present the entire thing to him, then you both decide and let the important signal of writing the thesis given by supervisor. Once the supervisor gives the nod, you start writing the thesis. But before you start writing the thesis, it is important that you collect the entire material and you put entire things in place in organized folders so that you can go ahead with it. Now, as I can see, like there are many of the participants who are asking me questions. Uh, I would say that we have a live question answer session at the end of this. Sufficient time is given. So please address back these questions again to me and I will answer back to you. You just focus on your work, on the presentation, and try to understand it. Then you can write the questions and you can ask me at the end of the live question answer session when I'll answer each of you independently. Then these are the prerequisites for thesis writing, and once you have these prerequisites met and one supervisor accepts that the thesis can be written, then you go ahead for writing the thesis. Now, for writing the thesis, we'll first focus on the structure of the thesis as what it is and how it is, and based on which we proceed ahead with the various other aspects. Now, one important aspect to be remembered here is that thesis, when you start writing, you understand the instructions for writing the thesis. Now, here, instructions for writing thesis is not specific to any particular stream of science. It may be economics, it's political science, it's biological science, or any of them. Any thesis, when written, has a set of instructions which have to be followed clearly, and when based on which is what we write. Now, the instructions are framed by the corresponding university or the institute where the thesis is done. So before you start writing thesis, collect the general guidelines which are required for writing the thesis and understand them, and then you have to start writing. So read the instructions, download them, and utilize them. If these instructions are not adhered to, the thesis will not be accepted by the university itself for submission. Now, first and most important thing is the font size in thesis. Typically, in most of the cases, it's Times New Roman 12 format, which is used for writing most of the thesis. Any thesis, when you write, has a header and footer for each page. The header will have the chapter number and the footer will have the page number. There is no restriction for number of pages that are written for a thesis. It can be anywhere between 175 to 200. However, 200 pages thesis is pretty long. Remember one thing, that though we can write a large number of pages, a thesis should not look like an autobiography. It should not be too elaborate that people or the reviewers lose interest in reading the thesis. So typically it's between 150 pages is a normal thesis, but you can have more depending on the stream that you are following. It could go up to 175 to 200, but refrain from going from more than 200 pages. Now, now in case of thesis, when you're writing, if you have, like, if you are generating your own figures and tables, that's okay. But if you are using figures from any other journals or tables from any other journals, then it's important that you take permission before you do that. Otherwise, it is considered as plagiarism. You cannot just copy figures from any other's thesis and you put it. You have to take appropriate permissions, and then only you are allowed to use it out. So remember to take the appropriate permissions if you find that you have to use illustrations in introduction or in any other places. Then what I have shown here is a representative example of how the header and footer looks in the thesis. So you put the header and you put the footer with the specifications which are shown here. This is like one of the examples I've randomly chosen from internet, and that is how it shows that you have it organized. Then you have the other important aspect before you start writing the thesis includes for margins. Typically, you leave 2.5 centimeters space on top and bottom, 3.5 centimeters on left, and 1.3 centimeters on right. This is a standard way of writing thesis. And assuming that a typical page has 250 words that you write, after putting these margins and with a line distance of 1.5, you might have less word count per page. So your pages are going to automatically increase when you are writing the thesis. The line distance is kept at 1.5 at the justification tab on. Now these instructions for margins, line distance are common for all the chapters in the thesis, including summary, conclusions, references, and even for abstract and other pages. However, one exception is for abstract, wherein which you can put double spacing and you can write it there. Usually the abstract writing, the font size is fixed, but the line distance can be varied depending on how the university instructs it. Then you can have, for cover page has exceptions that you can use different font and you can make it colored and others as such, because cover page is where you start with and that's how you go with. So if people are looking at the cover page, they must be interested in your thesis. So accordingly, you put it and write it. Then page number prior to chapters is written in Roman numerals, whereas once chapter starts, page numbers are written in regular numbers. So these are like some of the generalized instructions which are universally true for any thesis. Now, with these in mind, we will proceed ahead with now how to write the initial pages for thesis. And now when we come to initial pages for thesis, now first we will focus on the cover page. Now the following information has to be provided in the cover page, which includes the title of the thesis, then the first and the last name of the author, whether it is a bachelor's thesis or PhD thesis, the faculty to whom the faculty and department to whom it is being submitted, and the place and date of completion. So this is essentially important in the cover page, and all these features have to be provided. Now, this is one of the samples. Now, first you put in the title, then this is the cover page. If you have any images to be put in or so, it makes it very interesting because it's for your work. This is a representative sample which I have picked up from internet. And as you can see here, it is very clearly written, the thesis which is submitted for, submitted for so and so in Doctor of Philosophy in Faculty of Science by the name of the person, and then the appropriate department, its details with the logo of the institute and the year of submission which is there. So thus you will have all these details on the cover page which are very clearly mentioned, and you can have them worked out. Then once you have the cover page done, we come to the approval sheet. Now, approval sheet is the one which is important, because here you are telling that it has been officially approved for submission, and then you are submitting it. Now, it's a consent form. So that form essentially has various aspects, such as it meets the desired requirements for the university where one is submitting it, and it is suitable for submission and reviewing. So here, that consent letter or the approval sheet is signed by supervisor, the departmental committee members, and by dean of the faculty concerned. If any grades are given for the PhD thesis, the grades are also very clearly mentioned in this case. So there is a sample sheet which is put down here for the approval form. As you can see, now in this particular sheet, once you have the whole consent, highlighted here, as you can see, is the in highlighted here, as you can see, 4 of them. One is the signature of the supervisor, then the signature of the committee members, and the final is the signature of the registrar or the dean of faculty. So this approval sheet is important, and it has to be provided specifically, otherwise your thesis is not considered for submission. Now, once you have the approval sheet done, then we come with abstract. Abstract is the most important part. It is like the soul of the thesis. Abstract is what is sent for reviewers. Reviewers go through the abstract. Only if the abstract is proper, then and then only it is accepted for reviewing. So ensure that the abstract is written in a clear and concise manner, and it is not long. For PhD thesis, the abstract is 350 words, whereas for masters, it's only 150 words. There are no references which are cited in abstract. It is a big no-no to cite any of the references in the abstract. Abstract is limited to 1 page. It is short, precise, and informative. Now, there are guidelines which have to be followed when you are writing the abstract, which includes these 10 points which are mentioned here very clearly. So 1, you have an opening statement related to your research subject to attract the readers. And once you have that, then 2, you have Then 2, you introduce the research problem to the point that you are investigating. Then once you have that done, then you have state the overall purpose of the study that you are doing, clarify the basic methods you use, either analytical, experimental, or numerical, describe briefly the softwares that you use and the assumptions that you have made. Then you give your results. Then you compare your results and give the brief summary of your interpretation and how novel is your work and what is the scope. So abstract, in summary, covers the entire thing, and then it is everything written in a brief way, and then you proceed ahead with the entire thesis in such a way. So these are the basic abstract guidelines which are to be followed and which have to be utilized very clearly, and you write a proper abstract based on this. Now, the abstract, once you are done with the abstract, then you come to the acknowledgement part. Acknowledgement is mainly associated with thanking the various people who have helped you through your whole PhD thesis. Now, it's the gratitude to various friends, departmental staff, researchers who helped in development of the thesis. It also involves in mentioning the support given for funding sources, the various faculty members who have helped you, the collaborators who have helped you in doing this whole process. Now, typically, the word count here does not exceed 250 to 300 words, and in all these cases, either for abstract or acknowledgement, they are single pages, and you don't write more than 1 page. Now, so you don't exceed more than 250 to 300 words for acknowledgement. Then once you have the acknowledgement, here is the sample of the acknowledgement which is shown here. So you first thank your friends and your supervisor, following which you thank your friends and all others who are involved in making your thesis successful. Then Post acknowledgement, you have one page for dedication. Now, when you are talking of dedication, it's mainly like you express your gratitude to your parents and your close family members who have seen all your sufferings and, who have been helpful to overcome them when the times of PhD was going really tough. You just write brief few lines. You don't write a lot here. It's just not more than few statements which are written. A sample dedication one is shown here as what it is, like as how it's written: to mom and dad who always picked me up on time and encouraged me to go on every adventure, especially this one. So you put in the dedication, though this is a very small part of it. It is important in thesis because it plays more of an emotional role for the researcher, and hence this is customarily included in all the thesis. Once you finish the dedication sample, then we come to the list of abbreviations. So you have a large number of abbreviations you use in thesis. So we have to put in all. So you write the full form and the corresponding abbreviation which is used. They are written in an alphabetical order. Usually they are not more than one page. However, you can sometimes have more than a page if there are too many of them. And when you are writing the thesis, you should write first the full form of the word, and in brackets you write the abbreviation. Later on you follow to write abbreviation completely. So somewhere at least the full word has to be mentioned, and then only abbreviation has to be followed. And that is usually a rule which is followed while writing thesis or even for a research paper per se. Now this is a sample of list of abbreviations. As you can see here, you have like CNTs is carbon nanotubes, DMSO is dimethyl sulfoxide, and so on. So as you can see, you write the abbreviation and its a description. Now, once you have the abbreviation form done with, then we go for list of symbols if ever you have any of them. It also goes in the same way. You write the symbol first, you write its nomenclature, and you put the unit which is corresponding to it, and you give these details as such in the next page following it. Then once you have the list of the symbols done, you come to list of tables. Now, while doing the thesis, you write a large number of chapters, and in each chapter, you put a large number of tables to explain your results. Now, the tables have to be numbered exactly in the same way as how they appear in the text. And then and when you write the tables in the what do you call thesis chapters, there should be a brief description of the table that should be there. So the table and its description should be in the same page number as how you mention it here in the list of tables. There cannot be any deviations here because that will create a lot of problems. Once the thesis is bound, you cannot unchange the things. Then you have list of tables. Here is the sample version which I have put forth. Like the chapter 1, for example, you have table 1.1. You are even giving the description of what's the type of natural polymers, their source and examples. Chapter 2, you have other ones which are related to. So it is essential that you have the list of tables properly drafted out. Then you have list of figures. It goes the same way for figures as well. The various figures used in writing thesis in different chapters has to be summarized here. The figures have to be numbered in exactly same way as how they appear in the text. The description of the figure along with exact page number as where it is there has to be taken care of like tables. So you cannot have like deviations in this part. If you have, then your whole thesis will has to have recorrections and you have to reprint it again. This is the example for list of figures. As you can see here, chapter 1, figure 1.1 and its description correspondingly for various other chapters simultaneously. Then once you finish all listing out the various ones as such, then we have the table of contents. Now, this is one of the important parts because it lists out the entire thing in the thesis. Whatever chapters, references, everything that you put in has to be written in table of contents very clearly, and it has to be numbered correctly. The description of various contents of the thesis with the exact page numbers has to be accurate and should match. So typically all these table of contents and list of figures and tables is done when once the thesis is written. In all other aspects, these are the last ones which are followed and which are used. Now, here, as can be seen here, one part of table of contents, as I mentioned, all the ones before chapters like the title page, certificate, declaration, acknowledgements, abstract, and others are numeric. They are given Roman numerals. Then once you come to chapters, you start giving normal numerical numbers for it. Now, the other example which I have shown here clearly illustrates that. So once you have it, for example, here, chapter 1, overview of so and so, it is written as 2 to 13. When once you have 2 to 13, you are giving each of the details for the subheadings, in which page it appears and how it appears and how you go further with it. So that is how is the table of contents written for thesis. Now, with this, the basic aspects related to initial pages is covered. Once we have all the initial pages which are covered with it, then we go ahead with the thesis contents. And there are several of the aspects which have to be covered in thesis contents, which we will go now methodologically and systematically one after the other. Now, as can be seen here, the thesis is written in multiple chapters. Like you can have a large number of chapters. Typically, chapter 1 is always the introduction. Chapter 2 is the literature review. Chapter 3 is methodology. Chapter 4 results, and chapter 5 is the discussion. Then summary, conclusions, and recommendations are usually not considered as chapters. They are written essentially as final aspects. There is no limit for number of chapters written in the thesis. So because it is your thesis, a researcher's thesis, and you want to add the data, you can add number of chapters you need. However, please check with university or the corresponding institute if there is a limit for number of chapters that can be put in. Now, we are going to discuss each of these thesis contents separately, one after the other, and try to understand as how we do it and how we work it out. Now, before I proceed with thesis contents, now there are different ways of writing thesis. Now, the contents which I have provided are broadly based on the generalized approach. However, there are various ways when one can write thesis. It depends on the stream in which one is writing the thesis. Now, in some cases, you write the thesis in chapters, and each chapter has got its own introduction, materials, methods, results, and discussion. That is one way you can put it. So chapter in itself is complete. Then in other cases, you write the introduction, literature review, materials and methods separately. Results and discussion for whole set is written separately. And then you will have the review, discussion, summary written for the entire experiments done. It depends on what is the nature of the thesis and how you are doing it. And so that will be finalized as how it is to be done with the researcher and his supervisor. Now, objectives for the thesis can be written when you are writing the introduction chapter itself. And then later on, you can, when you are presenting the chapters, you can write what the objective is and what are the corresponding results which are obtained based on this. Now let us proceed with the how to go about with it. This is the general flow chart showing major aspects of thesis. First, you identify a research question. Then you review the literature. Then you design and execute your own research. That could be by multiple methods, qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, or any of them. Then you draw your conclusions and present your findings. And that is how is the way a general thesis is organized, and that's how it goes. Now let us come to chapter 1, wherein which we will be talking about how to write the introduction and background of the study. Now, introduction is the most important part of the thesis. Now, that is the first chapter of your thesis which you have. Now, in case of introduction, this here you give the context on the basis of which you are trying to do research and how you are developing your research question and hypothesis. Many of the times, researchers think introduction is just like providing a background for the research. So you just pick up the material from the literature and you write it down. It is not that way. It is not just background. It has the following features. One is the general explanation. The general explanation which introduces the particular topic. Then you come to your specific research, the area of interest, and then you explain what this particular topic is, how it has been framed. Then you give the hypothesis or the purpose of research. After once this is done, introduction also gives a brief idea of the various chapters that you are going to write in thesis with a brief 2-3 line summary of each of the chapters as how it is done and how it goes on. Introduction should be short, precise, and to the point. You don't, no doubt, you have elaborations which are present in introduction, but it is fine. But you do not try to deviate from the point and write a lot. The maximum number of pages that you write for introduction is 10, which accounts for typically 2500 words. However, if you want to write more, you can go maximum up to 15 pages. Typically, introduction for a thesis doesn't cross more than 3000 to 4000 words. That in itself is quite long. So you restrict writing the background and coming till hypothesis in 2500 words, and you can have another 500 words assuming for explaining about the introductory aspects and other features. It is always preferred to write introduction in the last, because once you write all the subsequent chapters, you know what all you have covered, and so you know what to write for introduction. So thus keep introduction chapter for the last, explain all other chapters, and you finish the entire thing. Then you start writing this particular aspect. Now, this is a flow chart summarizing how to write introduction, which has been mentioned. First, the context, the problem you are addressing. Then your position or thesis statement, the answer for the problem, and the main points, which includes like the overview of the argument, the hypothesis that you present. So in introduction, when you are writing, there are a large number of points which you cover, in which case you also have certain of the aspects to be covered, of which one of them is significance of the study. Now, this particular aspect has to be covered clearly in the introduction. It should mention why you are doing this and who will be benefited from such a study, because you don't do just research for the sake of doing it. Research is done such that it will be helpful for people and there is a scope for working for it. So who gets benefited from such a study? This section in introduction will have details about use of study done and its application for the society. So the significance has to be given clearly by the time you are finishing your introduction, so that people understand and appreciate it. Now, when you are writing the introduction, once the background is done, then you have to put forth the thesis statement. Thesis statement is what summarizes what exactly is what you are trying to do in your research work. It is highly specific, and it justifies the objectives of the researcher. Now, it defends the research question and helps you to establish your argument. So it should be framed very properly, and it's not just like that the research supervisor has told you as what needs to be done and you just copy it and you do it. You have to write it in your own statement as what exactly is the thesis statement. Now, quick thesis statement facts which are shown here. One, it should provide readers with the main claim. What exactly is that you are trying to say? What is that you are trying to do? Then you have to talk about the claim, how the literature supports it, and how you are proceeding based on it. Then it has to be written in your own words and should not be adapted or taken from anywhere and modified. A thesis statement always appears at the end of your introduction, and it is important that you draft it properly. A model thesis statement is what is presented in the next slide, as you can see here. Now, in this slide, if you particularly look at it, it is talking about the birth order has influence on person's character. So while writing it, it says birth order can have significant impact in the formation of a child's character. Now, that is the thesis part, which is reflecting what you are trying to say. And then the birth order is dependent on variables like parents, relationship with others, relationship with parents, and how the responsibilities have been taken up by the kid, whether he's like the eldest or he's the youngest. So these sub points which you have written here explains clearly what you are trying to do and what is the idea which you are trying to follow while doing it out. So once the thesis statement is ready and you have drafted it out, then we come to hypothesis. Now, hypothesis is you make a statement and you try to define the statement by analyzing the variables that affect it. It's a prediction relationship between variables. You can have variables which are dependent, you can have variables which are independent. So you test out the hypothesis by various statistical methods. So you have to propose the statement here. Like there's a significant difference in growth of kids when allowed to have a good physical activity. Here, what we are trying to say in this example is that if you have good physical activity, there is dependence of it on the growth of the child. So it is a statement we are making as a hypothesis. And so what we are trying to test here is whether it is correct or it is not correct. So make the hypothesis clear and then you work out on it, and then you propose this hypothesis in the introduction itself. You develop a conceptual framework. Now, conceptual framework elaborates the existing research problem. We try to envision what are the various things we try to do in that particular hypothesis that we have proposed based on the variables, and we develop a framework. The various key ideas of the research, whichever are associated here, are identified and we present them. We even look at what are the various independent, dependent, and intervening variables that you have. So you conceptualize the relationship between the variables, then you propose a framework. So everything comes here. It is nothing but putting forth your ideas in the form of a framework, that this is what we are trying to do, and this is what it is we are doing. So that is the conceptual framework that you have that is developed out. So then once you have the conceptual framework, this forms the core for introduction. All these aspects have to be covered. Then you introduce the various chapters briefly in introduction, and you mention as how what you are trying to explain out the things in them. Once you have this, you come to review of literature. So what exactly is that we do in this chapter and how we go about with it is what we have to evaluate here. So when we talk of review of literature, we collect the published data in the field of whatever is a particular research we are planning to do. First, we collect the whole data. We collect everything, whether it's papers, reviews, book chapters, or news articles. Everything has to be covered. You have to collect, make appropriate folders, and then you have to keep them. Then the various data published in this has to be kept together and it has to be up to date. You have to collect information from the recent ones. There is one rule of thumb which is followed while writing review of literature. You do not use papers which are too old or any of them which are like publications which are too old. Usually you don't go beyond 20 years or more while writing review of literature. Now, so for example, if now we are citing from 2021 papers, we go max till 2000. We don't go less than that. Papers which are too old, like from 1950s and 60s, are not used for citation. You can use another paper where it uses it as a citation and cite this paper, which will become like a secondary citation for it. Then only exception for this rule is that if a particular paper is cited in large number of times and that is used in your methods or anywhere, then you have to cite it. Otherwise, you don't use it for citation at all. Then, while picking information for literature review, it is essential that you only consider the relevant topic, the various studies that have been done and utilized for present study. Only you pick them up. Don't pick up any other aspects. Literature review should not be like a large autobiography. You write everything, whatever you can get. You should stick to the topic and you should write whatever is mentioned. If in case you are using unpublished material, if it is something more than 5 years old, it is not suitable for usage. You can only use something which is very recent, or if it is in the lab corresponding to, and people are deciding to publish it out, then you can use it out. And in some cases, you might have issues using unpublished material because later on claims might arise regarding that it has been plagiarized and permission has not been taken. Now, the maximum word count for literature review usually is 10,000 words, which, assuming you write 250 words per page, it will be 40 pages. However, with all the justifications and other things, it might go more. That's the maximum limit. Usually you don't go till that much. Number of references that you can use is 75 to 100, assuming that you use at least 10 references per 1,000 words. You can go more, but not too many references, assuming taking into consideration that you have to consider the years of the references for citation, and then you appropriately put it out. Now, once we have the literature review done, we come to methodology of the study. Now, so we will now focus on the research methodology, because this is another significant chapter which you have to write and which has to be incorporated in thesis. What exactly is research methodology? Research methodology, as the term itself says, it's a systematic investigation of how you do the research. It is not just writing materials and methods and saying that it's research methodology. You have to give the complete justification of your research, including the materials and methods. Only then it is highly accepted. It is a blueprint of research or study. The RM involves explanation about data gathering, various techniques used, and the details of the data interpretation. Now, it is the core of any thesis, as it gives complete idea of research that has been executed and appropriate conclusions that have been drawn. So thus, it becomes very important that you write this chapter clearly. These are the various aspects which should be broadly covered in research methodology. One is introduction, which covers the justification for the research work being undertaken. Then various methods that are followed for doing the experimental part, whether it's for qualitative research or quantitative research, you have to mention the various methods followed. Then the various methods followed for collecting the data and interpreting the data, and the justification as whether the hypothesis is met or not. So this point has to be clearly mentioned. Then here is the representation of how it goes. So first you provide the theory and the justification for it. Then you have your hypothesis. Then you talk of your methods which are done. Then you finally come to interpret them, based on which you give either the confirmation or rejection of the hypothesis. So uh, then what is the research approach that you have followed? Now you have the entire literature review with you, so you know what is the research you want to do and how you want to do. So based on that, you have to give a brief and concise summary as what exactly needs to be done. Here you can give appropriate references. For example, if you are talking of effect of particular variables on plant growth, then you have to look at various aspects. What are the variables which have already been covered? What are the variables you want to cover? Why you want to cover these variables is linked from the review of literature. So you have to put in all these, and whether you are going to evaluate a single variable or are you going to evaluate multiple variables. So then you have to do all these out, and you have to give justification. And here you can use references, and you have to cite references so that it makes valid why exactly you have taken a specific research approach. Then, based on the literature, once you have done the appropriate literature, this thing, and you have got the research approach, you have to develop a proper model for the study. The model that you have to include developing will be like framework for the research. You have the hypothesis on which you will be now developing a model. Now, one example for that is to cure an infection. If you want to cure an infection in a population, what are the various methods that you will be following in order to cure the infection? So you make a model based on that. A, B, like multiple options which you will be using, how you will be studying the outcome if the infection is cured or not, then which method is feasible. Make a model, and then you propose the model and you include it in the research methodology section. Only then and then that it will become acceptable, and it forms as a sort of justification for the work that you are already planning, that you have done. Then you come to study design. Now, well, there are two kinds of research which you do, the qualitative research and the quantitative research. There will be differences when you are doing for qualitative and quantitative in terms of study design. Here, what has been put forth is for quantitative research. I will even speak about qualitative briefly here. Now, first, when you are doing the quantitative research, once you have the research design developed, how are you going to execute it? Like, you want to collect the data. Then how are you going to do it? Are you going to use any instruments? Then you have to explain about the various instruments, then with proper justification as why only those instruments you use. Then the reagents that you use for analysis and various experiments that you would do have to be explained clearly and carefully. However, in case of qualitative research, it will be more based on collecting data from public surveys. So you should have different methods, like you should explain about whether it's a question answer session, whether it is survey, or whether it is what do you call the so-called survey forms or any other related forms that have to be made, and how these forms are evaluated, how you grade them, all these things have to be explained. Then you also have to explain about participants, which area do they belong to, what is the significance, and why did you pick up that area. So in that way, the study design for qualitative and quantitative does differ, but in general it is okay that you deviate it out there and you start working out appropriately. Then you have the hypothesis. Now, when you have the hypothesis, it is essential to think of how you would develop the hypothesis. What exactly is the source of hypothesis? The source of hypothesis could be from literature review, as how it's mentioned here, or that you have already earlier published one of the research students has published a thesis, and you are continuing his work. So it's based on the observations which are available in the lab, or you are drawing logical deductions based on the existing research, continuation of research that has been performed, or personal intuition. Any of them could be used for framing the hypothesis, but that has to be explained clearly as why and how you are doing it here. So once you have the hypothesis, then you have to proceed ahead with it. Now, there are two aspects associated with hypothesis. One is called the null hypothesis. A null hypothesis means that there is a negative association between your observations from the research and the statement you have proposed. For example, you are proposing that there is a correlation between physical activity and growth of kids. And what you are observing here, that from the research, that there is no association, then it is a null hypothesis. Then another hypothesis that you have is alternative hypothesis or alternate hypothesis. In this case, whatever researcher proposes, it matches with the researcher's proposal. Like there is an effect of physical activity with growth of the kids, and if you are finding favorable results, then it is alternate hypothesis. So you have to finally come to a conclusion based on your results whether the proposed hypothesis is null or it is alternate hypothesis. Now, so in case of when you are doing quantitative research, you have to give the methodology very clearly. Like what are the instruments and methods that you are using for measurement? You have to identify the appropriate instruments. You have to give its description in the materials and methods section. The various measurement methods that you have also have to be mentioned. For example, if you are measuring blood glucose levels, then what are the various kits that should be brought for estimation? And how do you estimate it? If you need an instrument like spectrophotometer for estimation, you have to mention it out clearly. Then standard glucose curves have to be drawn, so you have to explain how you draw the standard glucose curves and how you use it out also as well. Now, if in case if you have, like, if it is a single measurement that you are doing and you need a single instrument, it is fine. But if you are involving complex pathways which has multiple genes and measurements of multiple products, you have to give all the details which are required for measuring each of the intermediates, as how you measure it, how you measure the end products, and how you work it out. And also you have to mention, if not the assay, what are the other methods which are used for the measurement. Like if the enzymes bind the metal ions, in that case you have to talk about how color based detection of the enzymes can be done. So every minute detail has to be given, and when you are talking about measuring all this, you will be using specific protocols which have already been published, so you have to give references for each of them. Here, even if the protocols are old and they are like previous ones belonging to 70s and 80s, still you can cite them, because these are like standard protocols which are followed for a given one. In case of qualitative research, you have to explain the questionnaires and you have to explain the seminars clearly. What are the various hypotheses that you are giving for each of them? Whether it is alternative hypothesis is what is the null hypothesis, how you are going to grade all of them, and how you are going to evaluate them. All these have to be there in qualitative research. Then once you have the instruments and methodology being mentioned, then you have to give the experimental details. How you are performing the experiment. If you are mixing the reagents, in what ratio are you mixing the reagents? In what ratio are you trying to do the whole process? How you are going to do it? All these have to be elaborated very clearly. Like various experiments that need to be done, you have to address the questions. Then various positive and negative controls that are needed for the experiment need to be framed properly. The samples required need to be collected, stored at ambient temperature. So how you are processing the samples, what is the procedure that you are following for processing the samples, how you are going ahead and performing the whole process. All this have to be explained clearly in the materials and methods section. Then if you have specific methods for handling the samples, then you have to mention those methods very clearly, as how you are going to do them out and how you are working it out. Experimental details have to be written in detail, because this is the work of the researcher and he has to explain it clearly. When the reviewers read it, based on that only they will understand how exactly the research has been done. Then comes the collection of empirical data. Now, when you are collecting empirical data, it is essential that you have to write all the observations and you have to store them in appropriate format like Excel sheets. The most common observations which are there, you record it, and based on it, you frame the patterns. There are two ways by which you can collect the data. Either you can do qualitatively or you can do quantitatively. If qualitative data collection, when we mean, we collect the data, but we don't go to the accurate numbers and we don't look at the accurate numbers. What we try to do here is we look for the overall pattern based on which we conclude what it is. Now, whereas in case of quantitative methods, we will be looking at in details of each of the method, like what is the results obtained in each of the case, how we have obtained the results, and how we are working it out. Now, analysis of data. When you talk of, now you have to analyze the data carefully, and it is important that you sit with your supervisor while analysis so that it can be concluded, as he's an expert in that particular field, as whether the data obtained is relevant or if the experiments have to be repeated. Now, for example, every data set should have its own positive and negative controls. The positive controls show that the experimental setup is fine because it's working, and negative control shows that you are not getting any unwanted results. Only once you confirm that the positive and negative controls have worked properly, you can confirm that the unknown experiment that you have performed is correct, and then you can draw conclusions based on the unknown experiment. Now, the various assays that have been done have to be analyzed carefully, they have to be scrutinized, and only then, if everything makes sense, only then you will use it for data analysis. Otherwise, you will not be using it. Then, okay, now in data analysis, there is what is called as false discovery rate. Now, this term is important because FDR is used most commonly in statistical analysis. Now, FDR tells whether the obtained data is significant or it is not significant. In data analysis, you have two kinds of errors coming up. One is called false positives and other is called false negatives. When you are talking of false positives, we know that the obtained result is wrong, but it is because of error in analysis which has come. So it is a positive data, but it is arising out of some technical errors during analysis. You then have false negatives in which the data, you know that the experiment has worked, but still the obtained value is wrong. So in both the cases, they are associated with experimental errors. So one needs to be sure that you thoroughly eliminate these, you associate with FDR, analyze the percentages and others, and then only you put the data. After eliminating the errors, the final data needs to be obtained and utilized for all the work. Then you have to model the data. Now, if it is what do you call, if it is a qualitative analysis, it involves a lot of modeling. So you have to enter into Excel sheets. The Excel sheets have to be properly sorted out. The values have to be put forth properly. You have to get out with logical conclusions. In case of quantitative data, it is more with numbering and the associated part, and hence we do not worry so much. We use limited sets. These are the most routinely used softwares. Microsoft Excel is routinely used. Then you have GraphPad Prism, then SPPS, SAS, MATLAB, and R is a statistical software which is used. Now, SPPS, MATLAB, and SAS, they are all mostly statistical softwares. SPPS is used for epidemiological studies, wherein which you have a large data generated, you organize it, you and make logical conclusions from it. MATLAB can be effectively utilized in case of chemicals fermentations, simulation of fermentations, whether the process is feasible or not, what is the cost which is involved. Microsoft Excel is most commonly used by researchers in biological side and those who are involved in what you call core science. You just enter the data, you draw the graphs, you get the plots, you get the required values, and you try to identify the values for unknown concentrations. GraphPad Prism is used for statistical significance, wherein which you will get all the ANOVA details and all other details. Most of this you can buy them, and then once you get them, you can use it very successfully for all the work that is there. Okay, then based on that only you proceed ahead and you propose the next part. So once you model the data, then you will get down with the appropriate conclusions. Now, when you are writing the thesis, it is important to write the ethical considerations along in materials and methods, particularly if it is pertaining to or related with qualitative work, because they are participants. We need to collect informed consent from participants. We need confidentiality of the information and return content from staff, so that nobody would leak out the data. Wherever the data is stored should be highly secured, and no one should copy it and leak it out anywhere. Various ethical considerations and ethical consent forms can be pasted as appendix in the thesis. It is important when you're doing qualitative. In quantitative also, if required, you have to put this. Then once you have written all these aspects, you would be talking about the conclusion part. Now, so how will you conclude the data? Once you have the analysis done, you have to conclude. You have to check for both null and alternative hypothesis. Now, if the alternative hypothesis is accepted based on the results obtained, it's well and good. Then you do not have to worry. Your research work is quite significant. However, if it is a null hypothesis and that you are meeting with a negative result, then you don't have to be disappointed. You can still go ahead and utilize it, but you have to give appropriate justification as why or where you have failed in your hypothesis. What could be the most probable reasons that you have failed here, and how and exactly the way in which it has happened. So now once you have all this, the materials and methods is written, then we proceed ahead with the results chapter. Now, results chapter, when you start writing, it is essential that you have to consider a couple of aspects when you are writing the results. Now, the various findings obtained based on the experiments, you have to summarize it here. It could be summarized either as figures, as tables, or Excel sheets. In all the cases, there should be appropriate description presented for each of them. So if you are giving table, it should have its description. Figure or Excel sheet should have a brief description of what it is. And results are not just writing figures and tables and just putting it forth, but it also involves what is called as writing it in an organized manner in definitive subheadings. So you first put in the subheading, you explain what the result is, and while writing it out, you connect it with the figures and the tables. So I have examples in the subsequent slides to explain this aspect. For example, here as you can see, now that is the heading for the particular paragraph. Then you give the description for the whole paragraph, and when you are giving the description for the whole paragraph, you put in the figure number that you are talking of. In that way, you are connecting the figure to the text. Then once you do that out, you get out with the figure with the description. Now you have the figure, you have to give description for the figure appropriately. Then there is another example which I have put forth here. Now you have here, like we are talking of effect of treatment of a specific component. Now in that case, first you give description of the treatment, and the table and figures associated with it come. So first you describe it. In that you mention the details are in the table. Then the table comes with its description. Then you can say that the same thing has been represented graphically, and you put the graphical aspect here. So thus you have to interconnect everything, and you have to write it specifically, each set in this way, all the subheadings with appropriate figures, tables, or Excel sheets wherever concerned. Then only the results section becomes very informative. Try to make it informative and very pleasing for someone to read, because you have more such organized things written. It gives a very good feeling for the reviewer, whoever is correcting the thesis. Then you proceed ahead with and you write the results. So all the results are written in this way. If they are written in one particular chapter, or if they are written in individual chapters, you have to follow the same protocol. Then we come to the discussion. So once you have written the results, then you have to write the discussion. Now, discussion section is important because you are trying to justify your results. You are trying to give a scientific argument for how and why the results obtained have come in this way. So it is essential that you have you write the justification properly. Often people get confused between justification and literature review. Justification is not literature review. In literature review, you write all the details which are pertaining to the so-called what do you call them, the research. However, in justification, you don't explain any literature papers. You cite them in order to confirm your results. So if you put in a result and you are trying to say that this is what we have observed, then you say that this similar such observations have been obtained, and you cite the references, but you don't discuss the references. So that's the difference between justification and literature review. Now, one has to use only relevant literature when you are trying to discuss, okay, and then appropriate citations have to be provided. Discussion often goes for 3 to 5 pages. However, it should not be too long, because then reviewers lose interest in reading it. So you try to write it clear, concise, but page limit per se is not there for this particular aspect. Similarly, results have no page limit. Results, because it is your work and since you are doing it, please feel free to add as much as pages you can add. You can constrict the literature review, introduction and material and methods part, but you do not cut short in these cases, because this is the most important part for your thesis. Then once you have the discussion part, there are four important aspects which have to be written in the discussion. While writing, you have to consider. One is to reinstate the results, but that doesn't mean you repeat the results whatever are there. Then you comment on the results, then you evaluate the results, and then you make suggestions based on the results. We'll discuss each of them in detail as what it is. Now here, the kind of statements that you write when for each of them, the multiple options which are there are what are explained here. Like, there are many ways of writing it. For example, when you are restating the results, you just don't state that this is the result we have observed, so this is what it is. We say that the current study found that the variables have an effect, which makes high sense. So the way you write the statement makes sense. Or the results of this study show or indicate that it has this specific effect, or the results of this study did not show that it has this effect. So you have to be highly scientific when you are writing it. You just cannot put forth or write writing to a common layman. You have to be proper, scientific, and in an appropriate manner you have to state the results. Then when you are writing the comments for the results, you have to, the way you have to support or write the comment, you can use any of these statements, like the results further support the idea that the variables have an impact, or the results confirm the association between these three variables. Any of such statements, either like confirm the association, or these findings are consistent with the fact that there is a relationship, or they don't match with our with earlier studies. Now, if in case your results do not match with the results that are already published in literature, you can openly mention them with statements like the obtained results or do not match with the results that have been observed in earlier studies, and you cite those studies automatically. These results are in line with those of previous studies, or they are in agreement, or they are not in agreement, and hence it makes a lot of sense. So the way you draft the statement becomes very important. Then you evaluate the results. So when you are evaluating the results, you can give any one of the statements which is like very scientifically accurate. Like, you have got a result, what are the probable explanations for this? Like, there are several possible explanations and you give them. Or it looks like that the results are because of so and so fact, and if it is not agreeing with the literature, you can mention it like the reason is not clear, but it might be because of this fact that it's not matching with the earlier studies. Or if you don't want to comment and outrightly say that it is not matching with earlier studies, you can say that the data that we have obtained has to be interpreted cautiously because it might not match with other results which are published in the literature. Thus, you have to try to end polish in a way that you don't go overwrite against the published literature, but you put it within that and then you try to explain it out. Then in the suggestions, you can have like, okay, this is what is the work we have done. There are still many unanswered questions about it. There is a lot of scope for this work and abundance which has to be thought about and worked about. So frame the discussion properly and write it in a very scientific manner. Use literature to support it. If literature is not supporting your work, then mention the reasons for it and still you go ahead. If sometimes you might have very novel results which literature might not support, that doesn't mean your thesis observations are wrong, but that means it is a novel work. So appropriately go in that way and then you work it out. Then that's regarding the discussion. Then we come to general summary. From here onwards, once you finish the discussion, then you don't have chapters. You have mostly like these are general pages. Now, these general summary and others are what are important for reviewers because they try to look for what you are emphasizing on. Now, the general summary section should summarize the complete research. Whatever has been done, it should connect the existing knowledge with the knowledge that you have obtained, and it should say what is the addition of new knowledge that you have done to this given field. Usually, it's written in 1 to 2 pages. It's precise, concise, and you do not have to worry too much about it. But try to explain it very clearly in the summary. Summarize your whole research properly. Then you go for the conclusion. Now, when you come for the conclusion, it has to be clear and concise. Whatever are the various questions that have been raised for hypothesis, they have to be answered clearly. It should completely summarize and reflect your research, and it should also highlight what is the contribution of this research in improving the knowledge of the field. So like already we know that we have existing this much knowledge in the field. So what exactly is more being added to this? So that is what you need to mention very clearly here. Then once you have the conclusion, these are the 4 main takeaways of conclusion. If you have to write an effective one, first restate the thesis clearly. Then review the key points of work. Then explain the relevance of the work. Give a take-home message for the reader, like this particular study or the research has thus shown a novel aspect. Then you connect all this and make the conclusion. It's typically 1 page, and word count is also limited. Conclusions are not written in multiple pages. Usually, conclusions doesn't have any references. Up till discussion, you can have references, but conclusion shall not have any references like abstract. Then you have the recommendations. Now, when you are coming for the recommendation part, you have to give like, okay, the researcher has done his part and he has given sufficient scientific argument and he has said everything sufficient enough. Then you have to talk of what are the limitations of the research. What is that the present research is not able to cover? What are the various aspects that could be covered as an extension for this? The various questions that arise from this study that could be utilized by the scientific community and could be used for further research. All these have to be highlighted in the recommendation and you have to work out based on it. Now, with that we finish the complete thesis contents and the initial pages. So now the researcher has done the thesis work. He has written it, he has made a draft of it, but it is not ready for printing. It can't be ready because you have to edit the whole thesis. Thesis is scientific writing which has to be edited. So once we finish writing, there are multiple aspects which have to be connected here. Now here, this involves editing of thesis involves as highlighted proofreading, editing and plagiarism checking. We will go through one or each of this slowly and carefully in order to analyze and understand as what it is and as how it is. Now, what is proofreading? Now, when we say proofreading, we are looking for, okay, you have written the whole thesis, but when you have written the whole thesis and you have finished it off, you have made obvious errors in writing the statements. Some of the statements are not interconnected, and some of the statements have errors which are obvious. So they have to be corrected. And then you have to look for interconnectivity. First of the statements in each of the chapter and interconnectivity of the whole thesis per se. So then the proofreading first has to be done by the researcher himself, and then he has to give it to the supervisor. Once the corrections are obtained from the supervisor, then you give for proofreading to other lab members and the other fellow researchers who are his friends. So collect all the corrections from them, and you incorporate those corrections, and then once again the researcher goes through and he corrects it out. Now this is what is proofreading. This can be done by the researcher himself, and it takes elaborative time. If thesis writing takes a few months, then proofreading will need at least a couple of weeks to be done and got it done and finished it off. At some points when you are doing the proofreading and you're working it out, it becomes monotonous. That is the reason why this thesis, once drafted, has to be given to various other fellow researchers who can help you in this whole process. Once proofreading is done, you have to do editing. When we say editing, it involves a large number of aspects because it's scientific writing along with science. Grammar has to be proper. You have to put the adjectives, nouns, and others in a proper way such that the statement construction is good. Now, in science, though grammar is not given lot of significance, the basic grammar has to be met with, which cannot be avoided. So spell check, grammar check, and typographical errors all have to be considered and all have to be placed in an appropriate way. Only then and then that we can finish it off. Now, so Grammarly is one of the online available softwares that you could utilize for editing purposes. It is available for free, and you can actually have it pinned to your Chrome toolbar, and you can feed in your documents and it will help you in appropriate corrections. Now, this is one example of Grammarly as how the document shows it. As you can see, onto the right side, you have comments. How correct is it? So how many alerts are needed and how to correct it. It gives an idea of clarity, whether it is clear, not clear, and how it is. Then it talks of how much engagement is there. Is it engaging the reviewer or reader or not? And then the delivery of it. Is it delivered in a proper way or is it too scientific? When we are doing scientific writing, delivery is something which is difficult because it is catering specific group of people. So you don't have to worry about delivery and engagement. But yes, correct the various grammatical errors and all other related errors which you have. You work out on them and you finish them off. Then once you do that out, then comes the most important part, that is plagiarism. Now, this plagiarism is very important in any thesis writing. Now, the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and you are trying to put it as your own is what is defined as plagiarism. Plagiarism is a fraud. You can't just pick up statements from others' thesis and you can put them and say that this is your work. So, of late, it has been seen for over last two decades that researchers in the process of writing in some of the cases are trying to copy what do you call statements from others and then trying to use it. So the concept of plagiarism has come up. Every university or institute has a very specific set of rules for plagiarism and the way it has to be worked out. Now, so it is essential that your thesis is plagiarism free. Of course, you cannot have 0% plagiarism because many of the technical terms and many of the figures and observations which you write are considered to be plagiarized. So you should have plagiarism less than 5%. However, check with the corresponding university or institute where the researcher is working in order to confirm what is the cutoff for plagiarism. In some cases, it's up to 10%, in some it's 5. But typically, universally, it's observed to be less than 5% or maximum of 5%, which is accepted to be plagiarism free. Now, plagiarism can be done using a large number of online available websites, but they need to be commercially licensed. And one more important thing is that the researcher has to check with university the website they use for plagiarism. So please feed it into the same website and use it, because university would have license for it. And secondly, each and every website has its own way of evaluating the plagiarism. So you don't try to use multiple websites for plagiarism. Just use only one or two of them and finish it off. Don't feed the plagiarism reports of one into other, because they are deviations seen. So sometimes you get more plagiarized in one and less in other. So follow only one and you get it done appropriately. So here are the websites. You have Grammarly, you have QText, you have DupliChecker, PlaxScan, Unicheck, and Authenticate. I have put in the various hyperlinks for those so that whoever participants are interested can check them out. Grammarly, they say, can be used for plagiarism. You need an online license to do that. But however, I am not sure of how much plagiarism from Grammarly is accepted, because as just now I said, it depends on the university. So just to follow the university or institute wherein each of the participants is working, then go there, check which is the plagiarism software they use, and you use that to finish your work. Now, this is an example of a plagiarism work that is being shown. The work fed into plagiarism checker. It shows on the right, you can see content similarity. It says it's 97%, which means it's highly plagiarized. Down, you get the sources from where you are getting it. Like all of them are from Wikipedia, and it shows the extent up to which it is similar. In most of them, it's up to 30 to 40% similar, which is not good. And it highlights and it numbers it. And there's an order in which it numbers with appropriate coloring in all the plagiarism sites. And here, if you can see that the ones which are red color are highly plagiarized with greater than 5%. If you have green and lower colors, they are less than 5%, which you have. So go ahead, work out on all of them, and then you try to make it plagiarism free. However, in many of the cases, it is not possible for the researcher himself to do everything. He will write the thesis, but he can't do all these editing aspects. That's the reason why that we have thesis editing services. They are helpful. Now they help in fine tuning the thesis along with removal of plagiarism. This is done with the help of experts in the concerned field. So most of these thesis editing services, they have experts who have done PhDs, and they will be helping you out at every step to make it the thesis plagiarism free and to get it done compulsory in a proper manner. Now, one of them is research graduate. You have the contact details as well as the WhatsApp number on which you can consult research graduate. It is a PhD and master's consulting company that yes, we are here to help you out. If in case you want to, please feel free as to contact us on this. We can help you with all the aspects, including thesis editing as well as in thesis writing also. Then once you have the editing services done, so the thesis has been edited now, you have everything ready. You have to put bibliography or references. Now, references are a critical part. The references have to be, they have to be written in a specific style. There are multiple styles for referencing which have been put here. The most popular styles include MLA, APA, Chicago, IEEE, and CSC. Most of these are identical, but there are slight differences, which I'll enumerate and I'll tell you how it is. So the full forms for most of them are also put forth on the right-hand side, and it's self-explanatory there. Now, the referencing style examples, when you come to, here you have the various referencing style examples. The first one is APA style. In APA style, you have the authors, following which you have the number, the year, following which you have the title and the journal details. details. In MLA style, the year is not written after the authors, but it is written along with the journal publication details. Now, when you come to Chicago style, you have the year returns. It's similar to APA, but you don't put the year in parentheses, and you have to put in the year, month of publication along with the journal details that you have got. So then you have the IEEE style. When you take in the IEEE style, here is slightly different, and it is more like MLA style. In these cases, there are only minor differences. The way some of them, you don't put like the page number and then you put the page number. In some, you only put the page number and you work it out. So then you have the CSE style. In case of CSE style, as you can see here, yeah, it is similar to APA, but you have slight differences again. So all these styles are very identical with slight differences that you have, that you needs to be worked out. The referencing style is based on the university where thesis is being submitted. And yes, so you have to be careful to follow the same format. In most of the cases, it's the APA style which is followed in thesis writing. All references, which include publications, books, chapters, news articles, they all need to be cited appropriately in the thesis. There is no limit for number of thesis references written in the thesis. They have to be written in alphabetical order, and it's based on the university that you do it. So please check with the your corresponding university or institute and then follow it accordingly. Then once the list of referencing or bibliography is done, then we come to list of publications. So usually if the researcher has published articles, he needs to cite them out, and it is done numerically at the end of thesis. The page limit is not there. Even though you have many articles, it should usually come in 2 pages. If you have done any book chapters, if you have attended any conferences, they all can be cited. A copy of the entire publications of book chapters, conferences, as well as of the publications can be put as appendix in the end of the thesis without any problem. Because it is your work, it is up to you. You can go ahead and you can happily present it out. Then, so you then make the entire details ready. You draft the whole thesis, you edit the whole thesis, you finish the whole work. And once you have finished the whole work and you have got it out, then you go ahead, print out the thesis along with the abstract, submitted to the university. The abstract then will be presented to the reviewers, and then they will decide whether to accept or not. So it's very important that you write the abstract properly. Once you have written the abstract properly, only then you can consider for proper acceptance for the thesis. Before it is sent to reviewers, the university will check the whole aspects related to the rules for writing the thesis. If they are not met, the university will not accept it for submission. So please ensure you check all the details and all the instructions, each of them in detail, and then only you submit it out. Once that is done and it goes for reviewers, what makes a good thesis? Now that's a very good point and a very interesting point. What is that reviewers are looking for? First is your abstract. How good is your abstract written? How are you trying to signify your research? Once that is done, they look for entire thing, like your introduction. Has the introduction been framed properly? Is it matching the requirements? Is the introduction connecting to hypothesis and other chapters clearly? That has to be mentioned and very clearly and effectively answered. Then, what is the research question raised? How exactly is that the research question relevant with respect to the present day study? Because you have an in detailed literature review already written, the question arises here as how exactly is that it has been done? So is it matching? Is it fitting with the literature review? Is it extending the knowledge gap which is there in terms of the research question, that will be looked at. Then once you have done it, they go for the methodology section. They look at the various weaknesses. If there are any weaknesses in the proposed methods, how are the results which are presented and justified? Have they been done properly? Now, once you have the results presented, you discuss and you conclude and you summarize the whole thing. Has the discussion and conclusion been done properly? Is it making sense or not? Is that what is looked at? Does the research have any scope? Can it be extended? Always remember one thing, that reviewers will look for novelty. And if it is novel, then what kind of methods have been done to prove the novelty? Are there any new methods that have been developed, and how it is fitting with the literature? Say if in case your particular research in case does not have the hypothesis being means is not meeting the results, meaning it's a null hypothesis, and still you have spent a lot of time and you want to present the null hypothesis, no problem, you can go ahead and do it, but you should justify properly at every step why the hypothesis could not be met, where could have been the problems, what would have happened, and how would have happened. All this have to be explained clearly. If it is an alternative hypothesis, then it is perfect. There is no problem at all with it. You can work out very effectively, and then you can go ahead and publish. Now, one interesting question which many a times people might consider or participants might also have is, you have already published papers, so can the published papers be directly used for writing thesis chapters? Yes, of course. You have published the papers, so your thesis is easy to do. The chapters are ready. But however, one point which you have to remember here is, though you have published and you have got it done, it is not like you can directly paste the paper for each of the chapters. It has to fit into the thesis chapters model, and it has to go. You can straight away use the materials, methods, results, discussion, figures without any problem. In fact, I would say that if you already have papers published, your 3/4 of work is done for thesis writing, because it's very easy to write thesis once you have papers. Only you have to focus on introduction, literature review, and a bit on materials and methods. Otherwise, you do not have to worry on any other aspects. So you have papers published, you can use them. Then you can put all the papers as appendices and you can use them. Always remember one thing, that thesis should showcase your research. It is not just writing thesis blandly as such. Try to make it attractive, try to make it pleasant for people to read. Have figures, have images which you have developed, you can put on the cover page and everywhere. In case if you are having figures and images, take them on highest quality print with matte finish so that they look good, and you can use them, and then put them appropriately and use them. You can cut down on the introduction, you can cut down on the review of literature and materials and methods, but you cannot cut down on from results onwards, because they are very important. Try to focus on it and try to evaluate the things in an effective manner. Make it very attractive so that anyone who reads it will be happy to go through. Your thesis is the hard work for years which you are doing, and whatever you have done, you should put it in a very proper manner. You cannot ignore it. So if you have done 5 years of research work, at least put half year for writing the thesis and get it done. Don't try to do it in a hurry burry and get the thesis done just as such. So ensure that you take out sufficient time, ensure that you write everything properly and make it highly presentable, because thesis is the only way by which people identify you. So ensure you do it properly and get it done exactly in the way that is required. So only when you can do that, then your thesis becomes effective. So as I have mentioned, you follow all the tips and tricks which have been given here. Try to incorporate them everywhere and utilize it so that it is easy for you and you can work it out in an effective fashion. So only when and then your thesis will be effective. Once you can have an effective thesis, it's very likely that you can be awarded from the university for best thesis also. So please keep that in mind and then focus to do it out. So with this, I'm done with the seminar. Now we are open for live question and answer session. I will work out and I'll answer each of your questions. So please keep posting. I'm here to answer for you. Now, okay, there is a question from Roshni which says, after adding citations, is it possible that you can still get plagiarism? After adding citations, still chances are there for plagiarism. Well, references are not used for plagiarism checking. You can't use references for plagiarism checking because references are references in a given format. So plagiarism checking is done only for the chapters, and you do plagiarism checking exclusively for the chapters till the recommendations References, abstract, the list, and initial pages are not checked for plagiarism because they are not counted for plagiarism at all. Okay, there is a question from Gaurav Gangwar which says references are the cited research papers and bibliography is the research paper you have studied but not referred in thesis. You might have read 200 papers and referred only 100 papers. Uh, Yeah, so in which case, if that is the case, even though you have read 200 papers, but you have only, have 100, you don't have to cite all the 200 papers. In most of the cases, many of these papers have citations of the other papers. Like of the 200 papers, 100 might have been cited in some of the 100 papers. So what you do is you pick up the 100 most important papers and you use them, and the others will be automatically covered as secondary citations in those papers. Now, there is a question from Tanmay which says, can I include literature review in introduction chapter? The answer is no. You cannot have, because it's a literature review is a separate topic in itself. So you can't include it in the introduction chapter. You have to write it separately. Okay. Then there's a question from Padma Shri whether the references should be written in ascending order. Well, please check with your university the format of writing the references based on what the university says. I know that it has to be in the alphabetical order, but I'm not sure of that. That will be explained clearly by the instructions from the university. There's a question from Wilford. What about Harvard style referencing? I didn't put all the styles of referencing. I only addressed the common styles. Harvard style referencing is almost identical to APA, but then the way you put the years and the page numbers vary. So it is based on that. Now, there's a question from Geeta which says, if we write alphabetically, then in the main content, the number will be different. Yes, if we write alphabetically, then there will be numbering will be different in the main content. That's a good question. Now, well, in this case, what happens out here is that will be decided by university. Are you going to number the references in the text, or are you going to write the reference name? That has to be checked. If it is numbering, then you can't go alphabetically. It's either numbering or it's alphabetical. So check it out. Now, the numbering based is what is called as Vancouver style referring. That Vancouver style referring is not for many of the thesis. So please check with the appropriate institute or university for that. Okay, there is a question from Dr. Uma B. Gopal. Sir, can you help me in work on cephalic index and IQ? Well, yes, we can surely help you out. Please contact Tejaswini for that, and then she can be helpful and can coordinate with us in that part. There is a question from Julius. Is there any need to have hypothesis? It's not hypnosis, hypothesis in humanities. Well, yes, you need, Julius, because any thesis needs a hypothesis, or rather you don't put it as hypothesis, but you can get it as a research question. What is the need for the research? You need to know what is the need for the research. Without putting the hypothesis, how are you going to do the research? So you need to have the hypothesis clearly mentioned. Only then and only then you will have the working out of it. So yes, you need to have it. Yes, so there's a question from Ashish. Instruments calibration and your work result validation from second party lab is a must. Yes, you can. You can put it in the this thing, but you know it will be like calibration and all those parts are not given in details. You just mention it as brief statements and materials and methods, and you finish it off. There is a question from J. Lavanya, which says how to decide the topic for research and maximum how to decide the topic for research. Well, how to decide topic for research is mostly based on your supervisor. So please sit with him, talk to him, and then you decide. There's a question from Shagufta Praveen, how to decide subchapter name in each chapter. Well, that's the reason why you need to organize your data. Once you organize your data, you can put corresponding data parts of each of them, and then you will get the subchapter based on it. So first you organize it, you go through it, then you can easily make the subchapters for each of them. Then is it Ankita Sharma says, is it necessary to keep odd number of chapters? No, not a necessity. Well, it becomes odd number because introduction is not your thesis main part, but it's a chapter. So it comes as odd, but not necessary. You can have different one. Okay, Gulfani has a question. What is the difference between master's and PhD thesis concerning research? PhD thesis is very elaborate and it deals in detail. Master's thesis is very short, like you are given a small aspect of the PhD for master's. You are not given the whole. Like if the master's is trying to evaluate a complete epidemiological aspect, then PhD is evaluating it. A master's will have a subset of it and you'll only be using that. Now, there's a question from Ajay. I have 3 published papers, 1 review and 2 working, and I want to make these papers as 3 different chapters, but it is showing huge pledge of 35%. Is it allowed? No, Ajay, 35% similarity index is not allowed. However, because it is coming from your papers, you need to check with university if it is possible. But one aspect, yes, that's a good question. Actually, Ajay, you have raised a very good question. If it is from your papers, then it cannot be considered as plagiarism because you have written it. But please check with the university if it is accepted, because when it goes to non-scientific people in terms of plagiarism, they will reject it. You need to convince them, and then you have to talk to them. And you talk to your supervisor. Otherwise, you have to reduce it down by modifications to 10% at least or less than that. There is a question from Arun Singh as how to write experimental methodology. Well, you have to write all the relevant details for experimental methodology. What you need to do here is that you have to put forth all the details of experiment and explain each of the methods in detail. Dr. Mahesh has a question. Is plagiarism check required for synopsis? Usually is not a requirement, but well, depends on. Check with the institute where you are submitting the thesis. If they want, you can get it checked. Plagiarism is not done for initial pages of thesis, so you don't have to worry, but please confirm it once again. Pavan Preet has a question. Can you tell me about the timeline that we have to mention in preparing synopsis and how to present it? Once your thesis is ready, it has been drafted, flag checked, and everything is done. In that case, you can make the synopsis. The synopsis for thesis is usually done within few weeks, and then you have to float it. Those can be easily given by the corresponding supervisor. Then We have Vaishali has a question. Normally, is the null hypothesis accepted or rejected? Well, actually, null hypothesis itself is a rejection, but it is not rejection in two sense. I'm not confusing you because it's your years of work and you're finding it's not matching your expected outcome. But still, no problem, as I said. You can go ahead and you can publish it. There are so many theses which have been published where the hypothesis is null, but still accepted. It depends on how you defend and argue your thesis. Then Mrs. Sindhu Santosh has a question. Chapter methodology conceptual framework is introduced in introduction, chapter methodology chapter. Well, see, many of these cases are like overlapping. Hence, there is no need for you to worry. If you are even putting an introduction, it will be done appropriately with a brief gist of it is given. Then later on, you can put it in the methodology section in detail. Then there is a question from B. Karpagam. Is it necessary to publish journal only in Scopus? Also, if you can specify some journals. Well, ma'am, this okay. So you can do it in others. Well, that specifications for the publications should be with appropriate thesis supervisor or your instructor. There is a question from Jasmine Kaur that if I make research paper from my concerned thesis and got it published before thesis submission, is there a chance of self-plagiarism? Yes, that was a question previously raised by another participant. There is a chance of self-plagiarism, which is very high, but I don't think it should be considered because you are the person who wrote it and you are only copying it. Please check it out regarding this with your supervisor and the university. They can give you a clear-cut idea as what it is. Then E. Dhanashekaran has a question. So, can you recommend me some of the best free plagiarism websites? Unfortunately, there are no such free plagiarism websites where you can check the whole thesis. The reason here is that thesis usually is for 10 to 20,000 words. Or so it's much higher, sorry, it's much more. The word count being high, after you paste it in the free websites, they will not do more than for 1,000 words and they ask you for licensing. So it is better you have a licensed software which you can use. And the free websites don't give you the complete report, not they give you the complete analysis. They hide many of the things. So you need to buy it out. Ganga S has a question as or okay. Molak, 1 minute. Ashish, okay. Tanvir has a question for part-time researcher in maximum. How many years he can do it? A PhD thesis, maximum, even if you are doing part-time, you have to finish in 5 years. It cannot go more than that. Deepthi has a question. Please guide how to write literature review and review paper. Well, literature review and review paper writing, yes, we can guide you. Please contact Tejaswini for the appropriate details and she'll help you out. Ratna Rakesh Vandavasi, please explain the tone of writing. Thesis is typically written in past tense because you already have worked and you have finished it off. It should go in past tense completely and you don't use future tense except for recommendations and other parts. Yes. Then Tanvir Rashid Khan says, how many years he can do the part-time? That's how I answered. It's for 5 years. Then how to take care of plagiarism in thesis writing is a question by Priya Kumari. Yes, you first write it. You put it for plagiarism, then you correct it. You can't write assuming that you will write a report which is less than 5%. First you write it down and then you take care of plagiarism. So that is how you need to do it out. Then how many pages must be there in thesis is a question by Patil Jayant Narayan. As I have mentioned, there is no limit for that. The number of pages typically is not exceeding 200. If you are from humanities and you have to write more and all, yes, you can. But ensure that it is not becoming like an autobiography and too big to write. Yes. So Dr. Manjari has a question. How to write bibliography, by which method? That's what. Actually, for bibliography writing in thesis, you have available softwares called bibliography softwares which are available online freely. You can just feed in any of the format, either APA, Vancouver, Harvard, IEEE, or whatever have been mentioned. It will give you the bibliography in that format. If you are numbering it in Vancouver style, then you do it accordingly. Otherwise, it goes alphabetically. Then Anchal has a question. Is it compulsory to write all these in one paper, references, bibliography, as well as work cited? No, you write in individual pages. References will go this many number of pages, or bibliography and references go in one or is same and go in one set of pages. Other parts go in other set of pages. Then Ms. Sindhu Santosh has a question. Could you please answer conceptual framework is included in which chapter? You can include a brief gist of conceptual framework in introduction and then later put it in terms of a model in methodology. It can go both the ways. Otherwise, you can have the conceptual framework in the form of a model directly in your methodology section. Now, Sanjay Singh says, if there is no data in study area on concerned research, how to formulate hypothesis? Nice. If you want to frame hypothesis, then your hypothesis will be novel. But remember, if there is no data available, you should go to parallel fields in which similar such observations exist, and you have to do a correlative research. Only then it is possible that you can work it out. You cannot have a thesis without having any literature review. So you try to do parallel correlative research and you use it for your work. Then you have Anurag has a question. What should be included in RM chapter in cases where I'm proposing a theory in my thesis? Yes, if you are proposing a theory, how are you proposing? What are the various papers that you have used to come to the conclusion to propose a theory? Use those for writing the RM chapter. Now, Priya Kumari has a question. How to quality review paper for publication? Now, quality of review paper for a publication so will be depending upon the analysis for plagiarism and related other aspects. So quality, as she says, how to quality review paper for publication. So you send it to your supervisors and other supervisors based on the various supervisors and others you have. Get inputs from them, get it going, and then you evaluate your paper and send it for a sample review to the journal. The journal will come back to you automatically. Now, Jayesh Upadhyay has a question as what is the difference between abstract and summary? Okay, so abstract is a gist of the thing you have done. Summary will be telling the complete thing, but in a more elaborate manner. Abstract is not written in more than 300 words. Summary you can write for slightly more. And in the summary section, you can include more details as how more relevant it is and what. Now, Apurva has a question. Can I review of literature subject specific, or I have to add ordinary information also? Review of literature, you start with a bit of ordinary information, but that will not be like a lot of it. It's just only one paragraph. Then you connect from there to your specific topic and you go ahead with your topic. Now, Vijay has a question. Is it not possible to read all the books for literature review? So is there any idea of selecting the main point to read without going through the book? That is not possible. You don't have to read all the books for literature review. At least read the most important books which are related to your research. And from there, you collect the main points from others and you can use it out. Now, Setu Madhavan Savitri has a question. In English literature, is there any scope for review as it is novel based? This is a very interesting question because I haven't never done it. So in English literature, it is basically, you don't need literature review because it's a novel. I think you don't have any much scope, but you can check it out once as from published English, review literature, even if it is needed based on the format. Then we have a question. Best way to publish research work in economically? Muhammad Amin Nadeem has a question. What is the best way to publish research work in economically? The best way will be is you take, you don't have like many of the images so that it increases the cost of the research work. You just have flowcharts and you have the explanation part and go for minimum number of pages. Then you can concise your cost for the entire thing. There's a question from Pawan Preet. The timeline that I had asked is the timeline I have to present before starting the research work. How to present it? So that timeline before starting the research work, you just take minimum time, like just a month or so, make a synopsis ready. But for you to make the synopsis ready, you should have the hypothesis ready. So you have to work day in, day out, and then you have the synopsis. Once you float the synopsis, you need to start your research work. Then, so Nazim Banu has a question. Citations in review literature should be paraphrased instead of exactly copying. Well, the point here is you are going to use a citation user. Like for bibliography, typically done in references, we use softwares which are available like EndNote. It will generate it in that format as what is required. So you just feed in the references from the folder and it will generate and give you. So that's the reason why you don't do, even though you do it like that, it might still say plagiarized for references. So don't put references for plagiarism as it has no meaning. Then how many articles we need to read to do research? From Chitra Devi P. Read as much as you can. It all depends on your patience, how much you can read. If you can read 3 to 400 articles, great. But one advice I will give you, if you can have an idea of what topic you want to do, at least roughly, you can concise it to 100, 150 articles. You can read and get it out. Then there's a question from Tanveer Rashid Khan. If part-time PhD researcher has completed 5 years, then what is the alternative to complete it? Unfortunately, there's no alternative. Even though you are a part-time researcher, you are enrolled with a university or with some supervisor because you have to submit your thesis to that university. So go ahead, talk to your supervisor and then finish it in another year and submit it. Okay, then Arzu has a question. What is the difference between a thesis and dissertation? Now, if you are talking of thesis and then you are taking of dissertation, a dissertation and thesis are similar, but dissertation is shorter usually than thesis. And masters, most of the cases will be submitting dissertations. They are not prolonged, they are not as long and traditional like what do you call the thesis that is written. Okay, then Diksha Singh has a question. Please tell us the difference between statement of the problem and research question. Okay, a thesis statement. You mean to say thesis statement and research question. Thesis statement is the preview for research question. You first write the thesis statement, then you continue and propose the research question. So you should have a clarity there. So you indirectly hint at what could be your research question in the thesis statement. Then you go ahead and post the research question. Then Anupama has a question. What should be written in PhD thesis, bibliography or references? You can write it as references. Well, both of them are very similar terms, so go ahead and you use it as references. Then Pradeep Kumar Uddandapu has a question. How to take care with plagiarism in literature review? Oh, well, so to take care of plagiarism, first write the review, put it in the licensed site of the plagiarism, get the similarity index, and then you work out on it. So as I think many of the participants have the same question, you do not work out based on plagiarism. First you write it, then you go for plagiarism and correct it. So first you write in the way you can write it, and then you do the editing part later. Then M. Nazima Bano has a question. Introduction should be completely put in your own words. Thesis title should be specific or broad. Thesis title has to be specific and not broad because it's your thesis is limited to a specific area of research. And then the other question is introduction should be completely put in own words. Yes, whole thesis has to be put in own words. You can't copy anything from anywhere. So you have to put it in your own words. That's where your scientific writing improves. Yeah, Muhammad Amin Nadeem has a question. How to check impact factor of the journal? You can check it. Go to Scopus or go to Wiki and ask for impact factor of that journal. You have online websites where impact factors are given for all the journals published in any field. So you'll get it from there. Yeah, Anchal has a question. Can we coin new terms and theory in research thesis, or is it advisable to write research paper on its first? You can coin new terms and theories in research thesis. There is no problem. Yes, if you publish it already, it is great. Otherwise, you go ahead and you coin. It should not be a problem at all. When the reviewers review it, they will come back and tell you. And if they pose questions, then you can defend it. Okay, Dominic has a question. What are the steps of synopsis for any research topic? Now, as how I said, synopsis or abstract has 10 points. Please look back at my presentation, which I have done. There are 10 points to be included in the guidelines. You can use them for working it out. Now, Srinivasalu has a question. What is the criteria for choosing right title for the research? There is no specific criteria. This has to be decided by your supervisor and you. Because when you usually start the research, you are a newcomer. So, and supervisor has expertise in it. So, he will help you out with this. Guru Raj Tenali has a question. Please help me to differentiate between introduction and review of literature or for correction of final thesis during submission. Sorry. Please help me to differentiate between introduction and review of literature as I have confusions. Now, though introduction and review of literature look similar, introduction will just give a brief background of the study and will introduce the whole thesis. Review of literature will explain the argument as what are the various papers which have been considered to come to the hypothesis, how we have selected it, and how we have framed it. So it is a detailed scientific justification based on literature is what is review of literature. Introduction, on the other hand, is just a brief background. Muhammad Avim Nazim has another 1 minute. Dipali Kate has, in case we need to reproduce figures, flowcharts published by other researchers, how do we seek permission for same? Yes, you go back to the authors because that particular paper will have corresponding authors. Go back, connect to them, and request them to give permission. Once you get the official permission, keep that email and you show to the university that we have taken the permission, and so you can use it. Ashish has a question. Validation of work from lab is must. Yes. Your fellow researchers who are working could be your seniors who have more experience than you, so they can validate your work and help you, or your friends who are working. Without getting a validation and without having an appropriate validation, your thesis might be stuck when the reviewers raise too many questions that the work is incorrect. Govinda has a question. For data analysis, shall we depend on online resources? Well, I would say yes, you can, but you purchase those softwares and then you use them. Don't try to feed your data in the free softwares. There's likelihood is high that your data can be copied by someone else. Purchase a license for the software and you use on your own. Then it will be a better option. Sissy Joseph has a question. How many articles and publications should be published? Well, it depends on how many you can publish and how many can you get out with. Ganga S has a question. Sir, how to frame research question? That's from the literature. First, what is the area you want? I think most of the participants have a question like this as how to frame a research question. When you want to frame a research question, first look at it. What is that you want to work on and get a vague, at least get an idea of what you want to work on. Then you can frame the research question based on it. So you need to have an idea of the research review completely and then only you can do it. Ankita Sharma has a question. Will you be conducting more such seminars in future? Oh yes, we will. We are very happy to conduct such seminars. They will be intimated appropriately by Tejasvi whenever we have it. Now, Sabarinathan has a question. In methodology, we are following the reported methods procedures. While writing, it shows plagiarism. In that case, what will we do? Yes, so we are citing it, but you should not copy it exactly from there. Try to write it in a different manner. The same paragraph, what they have written, you put it in a different manner and write it in order to minimize plagiarism. Sanjay Singh has a question. In record-based epidemiological study, wherein the entire data is used for analysis to describe epidemiology in the study area, yes, that is true. You have to use the entire data to work out and get it done with. Mm. Okay, thanks for attending the webinar. Take care and stay safe. With that, I sign out of this webinar. And I hope if you have any further questions, you can contact back Tejasvi. Thank you so much.